American. I'm a CPA. According to my daughter, when she was 15, that stands for cheapest person alive. She's now 26, 6 years of schooling, and got a career, and I don't think she feels that way anymore, thankfully. But we're not here to talk about it. We're here to talk about something else. I have enough of gray in my beard, if you notice, and there's a few others. Now, we kind of have seen through the years with my client list and people I've been known as successful people that they kind of carry three traits. One of those is they're organized. They're very organized with their personal lives, with their thoughts, with their businesses, with their careers, with their investing. Typically, a successful person also knows themselves pretty well, and they are constantly educating themselves, constantly learning from other people's successes, from other people's failures, from their own successes, constantly learning. And in that learning process, they get to number three, where they find their strengths and their weaknesses, and they really aren't afraid to surround themselves with people who are better at what they do than they are, thus forming a team. That team helps towards that success. Well, we can all think of lots of successful people we know that are respected by our peer groups. But I'd like to introduce you to somebody who I have a lot of respect for, in both in business as a successful businessman as well as a successful real estate investor. His name is Dave Zook, or David Zook, properly, I guess. I know him as Dave through the years. He has real estate holdings that is very active in the multifamily units as well as the resort development community, which I'm sure you're going to hear more about today. He has real estate holdings in several states as well as overseas. He has syndicated over $20 million worth of real estate so far in his career. He, along with his development partners, and we'll talk about this I'm sure, are currently working on a development in the resort area of the Ambergris Island in Belize. I think I said that correct. Did I get that right, John?
Almost very close.
They correct me all the time. It's okay. It's the #1 island according to TripAdvisor, which is a really awesome resource for tourist development. Dave's a published author. He's also spoke at the International Business Conference. He has a lovely wife, Susan, that he lives with his 4 children down in eastern Lancaster County. And I'd like to give a warm welcome to Dave.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, that was a nice introduction. I had to almost pinch myself to remind myself I was the guy he was talking about. But thanks for coming out. I always enjoy getting with real estate investors, entrepreneurs, and business owners. So I've been looking forward to this for a while. See some of my investors in the room. I appreciate you guys coming out. I know most of the guys in the room, but there are a few in here that I do not know. And just as a raise of hands, who has exposure to real estate in their portfolio? Real estate investors in the room? All right, interesting. Most of us. It would be interesting to hear all your stories and experiences and what brought you here and what you're looking to get out of this morning's presentation. Maybe you're concerned about the long-term future for the U.S. dollar or the volatility in the stock market. We're going to be touching on a few of those this morning. Some of you are probably wondering how did a Lancaster County resident get involved in investing beliefs, and we're going to touch on that a little bit. I first met 9-year Belize resident, our keynote speaker for this morning, John Turley, on a real estate guys summit at sea, where we were on a boat for a week learning about real estate investing, and we're with Robert Kiyosaki and his whole team and a bunch of other cool folks. John Turley was on board and didn't take him long to get me convinced that I would come down to Belize and see what he's up to. And after that was about 3 years ago. I've been back 5 or 6 times since, and my wife now even wants to move there. John is the managing broker and founder of RE/MAX Southwind LLP and has been the #1 RE/MAX associate for all of the Caribbean, Central, and South America each of the last 4 years. Last year, he was the #1 RE/MAX associate in the world, and that's out of 92,000 RE/MAX agents. His success is in large part due to his being the #1 up-and-coming tourist destination and the hottest real estate market opportunity in the Caribbean. John is the foremost expert on Belize real estate investing and its #1 market, Ambergris in particular. John is the only American to serve on the board
opportunity to be here. I do have to say, I actually even feel cold inside. I'm so not used to the weather. Being in the Caribbean, I moved to Belize from Colorado, but the body acclimates, and this just feels like a polar vortex day to me. So I know that I know it's cold for the time of year, but in any case, if you see me shiver, don't let it bother you at all. I do want to say, just to kind of add to Dave's introduction, I'm a student of real estate. As an investor, my goal and objective is to constantly be learning, taking in information, analyzing markets. I've come to realize that markets are more important than properties. If I find the right market, then the property is very interchangeable. And so I'm constantly looking at markets. We're going to talk this morning about why there's a huge demographic shift into the Central American Caribbean region and how to benefit from that as a real estate investor. I do want to make clear that I don't have a myopic vision. I don't only focus on Belize. In fact, I'm in the process of taking over the ownership of the entire region for RE/MAX for Caribbean and Central America. So I have 58 offices now spread throughout 30 countries. And with that, I have a much wider exposure to the entire marketplace, and it helps me to appreciate even further that the market where I live, the market of Ambergris, Belize, truly is what I feel the strongest real estate investment opportunity that exists today. And everything is always compared to what? Before we actually dive into the presentation, I just want to ask maybe just one or two questions just to get your thoughts on something. And that is this. For everyone in the room, just by a show of hands, if the idea of investing in a foreign market is just a little bit daunting, something you're a little bit nervous about or concerned or apprehensive, if there's any sentiment or feeling of that with regard to a foreign market, just raise your hand. And I would expect the hands to go up. So don't keep them down. In all honesty, if your hand isn't up, then at least answer them internally. Now, the follow-up question to that is, when I ask you to raise your hand, if you're just a little bit nervous, a little bit skeptical, a little bit fearful about investing in a foreign market, how many of you immediately equated that with an international market? Did most of you equate a foreign market with international? And that's one of the things I wanted to dispel right off the bat, is what's the definition of a foreign market? A foreign market is any market that we don't have enough knowledge, understanding, and education to make a qualified decision about. If I don't thoroughly know all of the suburbs of Philadelphia, then even something as close as Philadelphia is a foreign market as a real estate investor. Is Pittsburgh a foreign market to you as a real estate investor? Probably. Pretty good likelihood. We often think of foreign in terms of international, but in reality, in today's global economy, state boundaries matter very little. Even national or geographic country boundaries matter very little. What matters is education. If we have sufficient education about a market, if we have a clear understanding, then we're able to make a qualified, capable, educated decision about a market. So my goal and objective is at the end of our discussion today, I assure you that the market of Ambergris, Belize will not be a foreign market to you. You may not have been there before, but it won't be a foreign market to you. So that having been said, I'm going to start by sharing a rather personal and to be honest, somewhat embarrassing story of what brought me to Belize, why I ended up there in the first place. And in the telling of the story, you may wonder why I'm focusing just on my own family and what brought us there. But I think very clearly within the next 15 minutes or so, you'll understand that it leads to a much greater understanding about the market at large. So if you'll just indulge me, I'll start with that. So this is a photo, just a picturesque photo showing the beach in the town of San Pedro. That's the only population center or town on the island, population of 22,000 people. And our story goes back to February of 2005. February of 2005, my youngest daughter, Lauren, had not been born yet. In fact, this photo was taken later in the year after we moved to Belize. But my wife, Lucinda, and I were living in Colorado. I had two very successful businesses unrelated to one another, and I had a home office. So I got to work out of the home office, which I thought was wonderful because I had more proximity to my family. And on one particular morning, my son, Trent, who you see right here, Trent passed by the open door of the home office. And as he passed by, I looked at him and I did a double take. And I thought, my gosh, is he getting big? And I had to stop and think, let's see, how old is he now? Let's see, born in 90s. Oh my gosh, he's 8 years old. And what bothered me about that is that literally the last time I had really paid attention and checked in, he was 5 years old. I mean, I was there, I was going through the motions. I was a dad, a husband, a father, a family head, but I was so wrapped up in the rat race and the day-to-day life. Even though I was working in the home office, I'd have dinner with the family, I'd tuck the kids in bed, kiss my wife goodnight, and start the whole process the next day all over again. And I was so absorbed that I was missing out. And I realized you don't get a mulligan, you don't get a do-over. My 8-year-old son is only going to be 8 one time. I don't get to relive that year. My daughters are only going to have Sweet 16 one time, and I'm not going to get to relive that experience. So I said to my wife, I don't want to continue on that course. And she said, well, I agree, what are we going to do about it? And I said, we need to make our mission objective quality of life. Quality of life needs to be what comes first and foremost for us as a family. And I said, let's think of it almost in these terms. If we were to start with a clean sheet of paper, let's just pretend for a second we have no work obligations that are interfering with quality of life. If we started with a clean sheet of paper and we were to pick up and try to find the best place on earth to go and focus on raising a family and having good quality of life, where would that be and what would it look like? How would you even begin that search? How would you start to come up with credentials of where that would be? And just to give you a little more background, I lived in Europe for 9 years. My dad was in the oil industry. We moved all over the United States. I lived in Europe for 9 years, so I lived internationally. Had a chance to see the benefit of raising children to understand different cultures and different countries. And so what we did is we came up with a list. And our list was our wants, needs, desires, and requirements. And so our list helped us determine where we thought the best quality of life would be. And you notice number one on the list for us, and this was our personal list, so I wouldn't impose this list on anybody else, but number one on the list for us was English speaking. I don't speak other languages. I've tried, I'm just not good at it. My son is on his 4th language. He's got an ear for it, and I just don't. I've tried and tried and tried. So for me, if I'm going to move outside the United States, I'm like 91% of Americans who only speak one language. And so for me, as soon as I said English speaking, well then my list got a lot shorter. There's only so many countries in the world that applies to. I also wanted to be in close physical proximity to the U.S. I've got my family, my wife's family, business interest, investment, so we didn't want to be too many time zones away, too many hours flight time away, so that kind of restricted our choices. We wanted a good economy, political stability, good medical care, a whole list of options. And what happened is we went through our criteria and our list got shorter and shorter. We found that the place on earth that met the majority of our criteria more than anywhere else was the country of Belize. And within the country of Belize, more specifically, was an island just off the coast called Ambergris Key. So Belize is made up of the mainland and the islands. The largest, most populated island is Ambergris Key. It's the #1 tourist destination, and it's the #1 largest population for expats, or for Americans who have either moved abroad or retired abroad, or looking to retire abroad. So without going into all of the line item detail on all of these things, like the legal system being based on British common law, Belize is the only country in Central America based on British common law, and that means the property rights are the same as they are in the U.S. We have fee simple title to property. Well, that's very important as an investor. Things like the banking system. The banking in Belize has the highest reserve requirements of any central bank in the world. So in the U.S., we have the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking. Of course, the problem with the Fed is that they're neither federal nor have reserves. And in Belize, it's the furthest extreme from that. In Belize, the banks aren't able to lend $5 on every dollar of deposits, or $2. They're not even allowed to lend the entire dollar. If there's a dollar deposited in the banking system, the bank has to hold 26% cash reserves, and they can only lend out the balance. So it's a very unique system. It's the highest reserve requirements in the world, and as you'd expect, there's never been a bank failure, and it's considered a place of safety, a safe haven in times of economic crisis globally, because it has the highest reserve requirements. When you talk about currency, I refer to it as the US dollar with a parachute. And what I mean by that is that in Belize, we have something called the Belize dollar. It's pegged to the US dollar at 2-to-1, but everything can be transacted in either US dollars or Belize dollars. The exchange rate always remains the same. In fact, all real estate is transacted in US dollars. So we have the benefit that as long as the US dollar is a strong global currency, then we have the benefit of being pegged to it. It also means that as the US dollar has weakened against global currencies, there's been no depreciation in buying power for Americans in Belize because of the currency being pegged. But what's very significant is the ability to unpeg from the US dollar if global economic circumstances dictate that that would be to the advantage of Belize. There's two countries in Central America, El Salvador and Panama, that only use the US dollar. They don't have an exit clause, they don't have an exit strategy. If the US gets in trouble, they typically try to print their way out of the problem, but El Salvador and Panama don't have printers. They're not able to print US dollars. And if the US dollar goes off a fiscal cliff, then Panama and El Salvador are going to go right over the edge and they have no control, as does the US. Belize and Hong Kong are the only two jurisdictions in the world that are pegged to the US dollar, but they do so unilaterally, meaning that as long as it's advantageous, they're pegged to the US dollar. But in Belize, it takes one meeting of cabinet and two signatures, and Belize can unpeg from the US dollar and choose to be tied to the RMB or the euro or any other currency or gold, whatever it might be. So as long as it's advantageous, we're pegged to the US dollar, but we have that safety net, if you will. And these are things we might not even know to think about. We might not even know to ask if we're contemplating foreign investment. But from the very start, the reason that we should be contemplating foreign investment is our returns, again, are compared to what? It's getting harder and harder to find places to deploy capital and to get sufficient returns in the U.S. to stay ahead of inflation. If we're not staying ahead of inflation, if we're saving our money, if we're literally just doing nothing but trying to save, and we don't beat inflation, then we're losing. And so that's a painful thing. And so we want to look for markets and opportunities where we can command higher returns without having to take on higher risk. And that's what brings us to this discussion today. So just a couple of photos to help us kind of set the table. Beautiful, beautiful waters. The largest living barrier reef in the world is just 400 yards from the shoreline in Ambergris Key. So absolutely beautiful waters. When we go fishing, this is what we use for bait. The fish are so big. I'm just joking. But in all seriousness, I mean, we caught this is Ulysses, a good friend of mine. We caught these fish. This was early in the morning before going to work. And so we were out for about 2 hours. And right off the end of this dock, this is a calm day, so you can't see the white line where the waves break over the reef here in the background. But 400 yards from this dock, a quarter mile, is how close you catch fish that size. You don't take 45 minutes by boat or 40 miles to get out to the fishing grounds, and you'll see some aerial photos and you'll better understand what I mean by the barrier reef there. This right here is kind of interesting. This is a Taco Bell, a Wendy's, and a Starbucks all side by side. And I say that tongue-in-cheek as well, because in the country of Belize, there's not a single fast food chain or restaurant. It's not because they're not allowed. It just tells you where we are in the scheme of time in terms of development as far as being ahead of the curve. There's no McDonald's. There's no Wendy's. I mean, the fact that we can refer to Belize right now as PS, pre-Starbucks, I mean, I don't know too many places that are pre-Starbucks anymore. And so it's interesting in terms of looking at and studying the market. And we talk about Belize having the mainland component and the islands or the keys. Belize is bordered by Guatemala and Mexico. And we're going to focus our attention on the northernmost part of the keys, Ambergris Key. But I do want to just mention this, that Belize has been very proactive about being environmentally and ecologically protective in setting aside 46% of the entire country as national park and marine reserve. Just to kind of put that in context, here in the U.S., if you took everything east of the Mississippi River and turned it into national park, that still wouldn't be anywhere close to 46% of the U.S. So this is truly a massive undertaking, and that creates scarcity. And scarcity is a good thing from a real estate investment perspective. If people are concerned about Belize ever becoming overbuilt, the fact that half of it can never be developed is a good thing. It's actually beneficial. So the island of Ambergris Key is about 24 miles long, 3 miles at the widest. You'll see an aerial photo momentarily where he talks about how close the barrier reef is. It's 30 miles from the international airport to San Pedro. It's about a 15-minute flight over the barrier reef. Beautiful, beautiful flight. It's just a shuttle flight because you fly into the mainland. And then the only town or population center is San Pedro, and that's located here on the southern end of the island. And of course, Ambergris Key is known for its world-class water sports. It's one of the top 10 dive and snorkel destinations in the world. Some of the best fly fishing, saltwater fly fishing, spear fishing, reef fishing, deep sea fishing, all the water sports, parasailing, windsurfing, you could go on and on. The population of the whole island is about 22,000 people. There's 2 other islands in the Caribbean to compare it to that are approximately the same size, but they have much larger populations. Grand Cayman and Roatan. So Grand Cayman and the Cayman Islands, and Roatan and Honduras are about the same size, but they each have a population of 60,000 people, about 3 times the population. If you've ever been to either of those, you know that they're not overbuilt or overcrowded. So from a density standpoint, it just helps put it in context. Now, something we want to understand about the real estate market, for those of you who are real estate investors, when we own rental property in the United States, we typically are going to have a long-term lease, typically a 1-year lease, could be longer, it could be a 6-month lease, but typically a 1-year lease. And how often do we typically collect our rents? Or pay our rents? How often is rent collected? Monthly. So does everyone agree that's kind of the general standard here in the United States? And you can certainly do that in Ambergris Key. For example, if you were to purchase a condo or a house, then you might decide to rent it out to a tenant. You could have a long-term lease and you could collect your rent monthly. But let me explain why you wouldn't do that in all likelihood. A condo that perhaps could get $1,500 or $2,000 a month can also be rented out for $400 a night. That's the disparity between a short-term rental and a long-term rental. And so where the market opportunity is how can I take advantage of that short-term rental? Now, I don't want to have to take on the management responsibilities. I don't want to have a reservation system and a front desk and housekeeping and all the things that go along with managing a hotel or short-term rentals. But if there's a way for me to capitalize, that's a much higher ROI as an asset class, hotel inventory versus long-term rental inventory. So just to kind of get a feel for where the market is, at the end of 2006, there were 670 rooms in the entire market. That was our total market. And when I say rooms, I mean anything that could be rented on a short-term basis. Hotel rooms, condos, villas, single-family homes, bed and breakfast, all tourist accommodations. Just 6 years later, that number had tripled, and we reached 2,000 rooms. Now, 2,000 rooms is when a market reaches critical mass. That's the starting point when a market is able to effectively advertise to the rest of the world that we're now a major tourist destination. And there's 3 major groups that really start to pay attention when a market hits 2,000 rooms. One of those groups is travel agents, one is charter companies, and the third one is consolidators, travel consolidators. So charter companies, for example, want to book 50 seats on a plane and 50 hotel rooms, and then they want to sell those as packages because they bought them wholesale and they sell them retail. And likewise, consolidators like Kayak and Orbitz and Expedia and Travelocity, they actually purchase inventory at a discount, wholesale, and then they turn around and sell their inventory. That's why when you go to those websites, sometimes you'll see that there's a sale and they're promoting a specific property. That's because they're holding inventory and they want to make sure they get rid of it. And so we may not understand that's how they operate, but they're purchasers and sellers of inventory. So once you hit 2,000 rooms, a market really starts to take off. It's almost like the match striking the matchbook, and that's what we look for as real estate investors is what's a catalyst, what's a point at which a market metamorphoses or changes or takes the turn around the corner. And so with Ambergris Key at the end of 2012, we knew that that's when it would start. That would be the beginning. It doesn't mean that we missed the opportunity, but it means that we should be able to look and see at the end of 2012 that match struck the book. And I'll show you the numbers so you can decide for yourself if in fact that happened. But first, here's an aerial photo just to give us some context. So we saw the map a moment ago, but this is an aerial photo. This is the barrier reef right here. That's a 1/4 mile off the shoreline. The average water depth here is 6 to 10 feet. That's all the deeper it is. But when you get out here, the water is 3,000 to 3,500 feet deep, the deepest water in all of the Caribbean. So it's the most naturally protective shelter or harbor that you could have to have the barrier reef so close. From the west coast of Ambergris Key to the mainland is 12 miles due west. So there's 12 more miles of Caribbean Sea that's all sheltered and within the confines of the barrier reef. And then up here, this is a national park and marine reserve, 27,000 acres that won't ever be developed. And on the other side, this is the border between Belize and Mexico. There's a giant national park here on the Mexican side of the border. So we have 2 national parks. So it's unpopulated on either side of the border here. There is no bridge. It's an island, and there is no bridge connecting the two. So it's unpopulated on both sides in that regard. So in any market, you want to make sure you understand what the foundation pillars are. What drives the market? Is it jobs? It could be that when you look at a market and you're determining that it's going to be a good opportunity for investments because there's new manufacturing, or there's new jobs, or there's a new large employer that's coming into an area. That can certainly positively impact a market. In this particular case, there's 3 foundation pillars. There's 3 separate legs to the stool, if you will. And you're going to see that with the 2 largest ones, the baby boomers and tourism, either one of those on its own presents an extremely compelling market or extremely compelling reason to look at investment in this market. But when you combine them together, I just can't imagine how it could be any stronger. So we're going to start with tourism. And with tourism, Islands Magazine has consistently rated Ambergris Caye as one of the top 10 islands in the world to live on and the best island in the world to retire to early. In fact, it was voted in 2009 by the 500,000 readers of Islands Magazine as the best island to retire to, period. And so there's been a lot of recognition and a lot of accolades for Ambergris Caye going back all the way since about 2005 when it started to be discovered by the international press. But as of late, we really start to see what's happened with the tourism arrivals, with the actual numbers. And the numbers is what we want to pay attention to. As a real estate investor, if in a market such as Belize, if tourism increases by 10% this year, then that tells us that investment the following year should increase by approximately the same percentage. And here's why. In any given group of tourists coming to a market for the first time, say there's 100 tourists that come into a market, a certain percentage, we'll call that X because we don't know the number, but X number of people who visit that market are going to fall in love with it and decide they'd like to have a second home, a vacation home, a third home, an investment property. They're going to buy raw land to land bank for equity appreciation, whatever it might be. A certain percentage of people visiting the market are going to choose to invest. So X number of people are going to invest. If the 100 people increases to 110, which is a 10% increase, then X should increase by the same percentage. Does that make sense? Just simple mathematics. So, and typically, the action that's going to be taken in terms of taking action in the market is going to occur within the 12 months to follow the visit. So it's actually a sneaky way for us to know what's going to happen to the market in the following year if we just pay attention to tourism. And so that's why, as an investor, I spend so much more of my time focused on tourism because it's a leading indicator and it tells me what's going to happen in the marketplace. So in 2011, we set a new all-time record for overnight tourist arrivals. Now, the reason I want to set the table with this is that, again, I use the term compared to what? And when I show you how much the tourism increased in 2012, it's important for you to know that the increase was on top of the all-time record. Because if the year before it had actually dropped by 20%, and all we did was get back to where we started, well, then that really wouldn't be anything to brag about. So 2007 was the previous record, and then we had something called the recession. I think we all remember that. And during the recession, tourism did drop in Ambergris Caye. It dropped by 2%. Now, it dropped by 20% the rest of the Caribbean, but we had a 2% drop. And we went from our previous record in 2007, and it took us until 2011 to break the record again. In 2012, again, when we reached critical mass in the market, our tourism was up 16.3% in 2012. That's a huge increase. And just to give you an idea of what that would require in terms of new hotels or condos or villa construction, if there's 2,000 rooms in the marketplace, and you add 16.3% to the demand, 16.3% of 2,000 is 326. So if we added 326 more hotel rooms, condos, and villas, then we should expect that we'd be able to absorb that additional demand without having our occupancy spike and our 90 rates go through the roof. So the question is, if our demand went up by 326 doors, did our supply increase accordingly? And the answer is no, it didn't. Did we add 300 doors? No. Did we add 200? How about 100? No, not 100. How about 50? No, 30. So we had a total of 30 units out of all the condos, villas, hotel rooms that were built and added as turnkey rental inventory by the end of the year. 30 units were added, and we needed 326. So our demand outstripped our supply in this year by 10 to 1. You can imagine that it's going to take a while to try to catch up with that growth. Meanwhile, does the market stay static? No, because in 2013 we went up an additional 6%. And the market still hasn't added anywhere close to it. At this point now, between the 2 years, we've only added 50 units, and yet we've got 6% growth on top of the 16.3%. For the first half of this year, we're up 11.8%. So we see what I was talking about when I mentioned it in 2012. When we hit 2,000 rooms, it's like a hockey stick. You've got the flat blade of the hockey stick, and then the handle takes up a curve sharply. Well, that curve there was the end of 2012. And we're going to see this happen for the next decade, and I'll show you exactly why. And we're going to have a significant shortage of rental inventory, and I'll talk about what that's going to mean as well. Combined from 2011 through 2014, it's a 38% increase in tourism countrywide. Now, I emphasize countrywide because Ambergris Key is the #1 tourism market. So it's important to understand that Ambergris Key isn't only growing at 38%. I'll come back to that in a second, but that's the blended average for the whole country. Ambergris Key is growing even faster. This shows us right here the overnight tourist arrivals on a month-by-month basis. So this is January, February, the green is March, purple is April. The reason I want to show this to you is that we want to make sure that the growth is sustained. If we're going to invest in a market like this, we need to know, is all of that growth only happening in one season? If it was only the winter months, when all of that increase came, at some point we'll reach maximum capacity in the winter months, and we can't continue to grow. So this is actually very, very helpful for us to see that the growth year over year, month over month is continuous and evenly spread throughout the whole year. Even our slowest months of the year, this is September and October, these months are increasing percentage-wise at approximately the same amount as December, January, February, March, our winter months here as well. In fact, we just had a news article giving us our third quarter statistics, and the news headline was Belize boasts impressive numbers in third quarter tourist arrivals. We're now on track for a 14% increase for the entire year. And currently we're projecting a 15% increase for next year, but I'll tell you why that's completely wrong. It's going to be higher, and it's because of some new announcements that have just recently been made. And I'll share this with you. Pardon me 1 second. I'm talking faster than my body can. Throat's dried up. It was mentioned in the introduction, but this was huge news for us. In 2013 and 2014, TripAdvisor, with millions of reviews from 82 different countries, rated Ambergris Key as the #1 island in the world. So from a tourism perspective, you think of how much that adds to the exposure of an island of 22,000 people. And at the end of last year, December 2013, I think this is actually even more significant. Even more significant than being the #1 island in the world is to be among the top 10 destinations on the rise, or up-and-coming destinations. There's only so many islands in the world, but everywhere is a destination. According to TripAdvisor, a tourist destination is literally anywhere and everywhere. So to be among the top 10 in the world is astounding. And so to tell us that tourism is going to continue growing tells us the real estate opportunity is just going to get better than it is right now. So historically, past and present, the last 3 years we have a 38% increase. But I will share this tidbit. For Belize, from 2009 to 2012, it was 19% for the country was the growth. But the growth specific to Ambergris Key was 57%. That's 2009 to 12. So the growth in Ambergris Key was 3 times higher than the national average. Now, I don't have the numbers for Ambergris Key specifically for 2011 through 2014 because I'm still waiting for the 2013 and 2014 numbers from the Belize Tourism Board. But we know that it's tracking 2 to 3 times higher than what the annualized growth has been. But this right here, this is the rear view mirror. This is historical. We're concerned about the future. How do we know? Why am I so certain that the growth is going to be considerably higher than that in the next few years? Well, I'll show you exactly why. We take a look at the airlines that are coming into the marketplace. The great thing about the airlines is they do a tremendous amount of due diligence and research for you as an investor without you having to put forth any effort. The airlines don't take the policy that if we fly it, they will come. That's not how the airlines operate. The airlines have the benefit of looking at their own internal reservation system. So they know exactly where demand is greater than supply. 2 days ago, the flight was oversold by 4 seats. The airline looks at that and says, okay, we need to start paying attention and see if we need to be adding a bigger plane or another plane to that route. So in this particular case, pardon me. There's three carriers in the market currently: American, Delta, and United. And so simply by looking at what those three carriers are currently doing, we can get a feel for how bullish they are on the market. And if they're adding flights, then we know that tourism is going to increase, because they're the gateway. They're the whole means and methodology by which more tourists are going to come. So with American Airlines, they've added 4 additional nonstop flights per week between Dallas and Belize for this high season, starting this month. That's 640 seats per week to and from Belize. United Airlines, last December, they quadrupled from 1 flight a week from Newark, New Jersey, to 4 flights a week. So they quadrupled. And in June of this year, they announced that they'll have direct flights from Chicago starting December 20th of this year. So together, that's 5 additional nonstop flights within the last 12 months, from last December through this December, or an additional 800 seats per week. Delta Airlines, starting last December, added a direct flight from Los Angeles, and this summer they announced that starting this month, November, they're increasing from 7 flights a week from Atlanta to 12 flights a week from Atlanta, an increase of 960 seats per week. Now, in fairness, not all of these flights will operate on a year-round basis, so to keep it honest, I took out, because if you add up 640 plus 800 plus 960, it adds up to more than 1,600, but 1,600 is what we averaged additional seats per week that have been added to the marketplace. And in the tourism industry, a 160-passenger plane fills 100 hotel rooms, because they're not all single occupancy and they're not all double occupancy. That's the ratio, 1.6 to 1. So 1,600 additional passenger seats per week creates a demand for an additional 1,000 hotel rooms per week. That's a huge demand. The problem is the airlines can create that demand like that. As soon as Delta announced that they're going to go from 7 flights to 12 flights, did they then place an order for more planes? No, they just reroute planes. They just take planes from one service to another. They literally tomorrow can add a flight, and if they add a flight tomorrow, overnight, spontaneously, and there's 160 people that show up on island, you need 100 more hotel rooms. But it takes a lot longer to build 100 hotel rooms than it does for the airline to just add a flight. So they're creating an immediate demand for 1,600 passenger seats, an immediate demand for 1,000 hotel rooms, and we've had less than 100 that have been added in the last 3 years. So there are new projects online and there's new development, but we're not anywhere close to what we need. We're seeing that the demand over the last 2 years, we've averaged above a 90% occupancy for all of the hotels, condominiums, villas, and resorts on Ambergris Key. And that number, the demand is just going to continue to climb. There's 3 new airlines for 2015. The 15% projected growth for next year is based on what I just showed you. And the biggest concern we have with the growth, with all the flights the airlines are adding, is what I call the overflowing bathtub. Let's just say you go on vacation, and you go away for the weekend, you come home, and you've left the stopper in the drain, and the bathtub is 3/4 full. Well, you breathe a sigh of relief, because if it's dripping and it's 3/4 full, it means it hasn't overflowed. You got there in time. Same scenario, you get home and the tub's dripping, you've left the stopper in place, but the water's overflowing. The question you ask yourself is, how long has it been doing that? Has it been doing it since the day after you left, or did it just start overflowing as soon as you got home? And how do you measure the amount of water that overflowed? You can't. You can only look at and assess the damage, but you can't measure the lost water. And our problem is, we can't measure the lost reservations. We're running above 90% occupancy, and because of that, we can't measure the number of people that we're turning away that can't book a room, or they can book a flight but can't book a room, or they can't book either. And so consequently, they're not able to come. So our concern isn't how do we fill the rooms. Our concern is how do we build fast enough to handle the fact that we're actually turning people away in the marketplace right now. And the airlines are actually contributing to the problem. I should say they're contributing to the solution, but they're contributing to the problem of our not being able to build inventory fast enough. And meanwhile, American, Delta, and United aren't the only carriers that are paying attention. The TripAdvisor news is news that's available to every airline out there. They're able to look and see, hey, this is a place that our passengers, our customers want to go. So in this year, we've got Southwest Airlines, the largest domestic carrier in the U.S., that is going to start direct flights in the next 6 months. We have JetBlue starting direct flights. And we have Copa, the national airline of Panama. Now Copa you may not have heard of, and it may not sound too exciting or as exciting as JetBlue and Southwest, but Copa opens up Belize to the entire South American market, 29 countries that it services, and so all of South America now has a one-stop connection to Belize, which opens up an entirely new market to us, so we're equally excited about that. But these new airlines, we don't even know the passengers that are coming in from them, and the information I'm giving you with this is directly from the Minister of Civil Aviation and the Minister of Tourism. So I have close conversations and working relationships with the cabinet ministers in the country of Belize, and that's how I'm able to obtain the information to share that with you. Now our local airline in Belize is called Tropic Air, and Tropic started in May of 2013 last year. They started flying from Cancun, Mexico to Belize International Airport to help the European travelers, because Europeans have a very difficult time getting to Belize. They have to connect through the United States, and that means getting a U.S. visa, which is a lot harder than it used to be. And it means you have to overnight in the U.S. because the connecting times of the flights are such that they can't make it in one day. So it takes 2 days to get to Belize, 2 more days to get home, so 4 days of travel, and you have to get a U.S. visa. With only 1 flight a week from Cancun to Belize, the Europeans were able to connect in Cancun, skip the U.S. altogether, and they could make it all in 1 day. And the direct flights to Cancun from Europe come from Frankfurt, from London, from Paris, Barcelona. So several different cities Europeans can travel from Europe to Cancun to Belize all in 1 day. So May of 2013, they started with 1 flight a week. By last Christmas, it increased to 3 flights a week. And year over year, for the first half of this year compared to the first half of last year, our European travelers are up 23%. And starting November 1st, earlier this month, Tropic increased from 3 flights a week to 9 flights a week between Cancun and Belize. So we expect the European travelers to literally triple over the next year. And this is the headline from the article that came out in June. Tropic Air increases flights to Cancun to allow for same-day European connections. So the whole reason to increase, literally in the course of 18 months, to go from 1 flight a week to 9 flights a week is astounding growth, but it just shows we're just starting to tap into the European market. All of that was tourism. If we just stopped right now and just said that right there, that's the reason that this is a compelling market to invest in, now let's talk about the actual investment, then I think that would be reason alone. I'm not going to spend near as much time on these other 2 for that reason, but I am going to talk about the baby boomers, because arguably, they're going to have even bigger impact than tourism in the next 5 to 10 years. Now the baby boomers, as we all know, are not a theory or a hypothesis, so I don't have to make that case. We've probably seen a graph like this before. It shows that it's all those Americans born between 1946 and 1964 during an 18-year period that represents the largest demographic wave to move through human society in any of our lifetimes, never to be repeated again. But this graph doesn't really tell the impact, the full import of the story. I'll give you a statistic that will. If you take a look at all the elementary schools in the United States, 90% of the elementary schools in the United States were built in 1 decade, the 1950s. Why is it that 90% of the elementary schools were all built in 1 decade? Because that's how big a demographic shift the baby boomers were coming up in age during that decade. To really give you the full impact, take a look at these numbers. At the start of 2011, which was the first year that baby boomers started reaching the age of 65, at the start of that year, this is our baseline, we had 7,000 Americans a day reaching the age of 65. Just 2 years later, that number had increased to 10,000, a 42.8% increase. It's a massive increase by any standard. But the crazy part is over the entire 18 years, the average is going to be 11,765 a day compared to where we started at 7,000. So we're going to increase 68% over where we were, number of Americans retiring, or number of Americans reaching retirement age, 65, every day. Imagine a river going up 68%. It's going to overflow its banks. It's at flood stage. And just imagine that river staying at flood stage for 18 years before the water recedes. That's what we're talking about. That's how big a shift it is. We really don't comprehend how massive it is. And if we can figure out, if all we have to do is find out where people are heading and invest there before they arrive. It's as simple as that. If we can find out where people are heading, invest there before this huge wave gets there, then we can do incredibly well. So, what do they all have in common? They're all looking for desirable retirement destinations. It's the world's biggest game of musical chairs. When we were young, if you ever played musical chairs, and if you did, and I'm sure at least you know how it works, if you start with 7 people in the game, you start with 6 chairs. And each round you remove a chair. You have one more person than you do chairs. It's a scarcity model. Well, in the world's largest game of musical chairs, the rules are a little bit different. The number of chairs remain the same, because chairs are destinations. We're not building any more land, we're not creating any more land, so the chairs are going to remain the same. But instead, every year we're going to add more people to the game. We're going to add them at the rate of 11,765 every day for 18 years. So the chairs are going to be in higher demand. Some chairs will be in more demand than others. Some chairs can accommodate more people. They're more comfortable. We've got Scottsdale, Arizona, Destin, Florida, Costa Rica, and then we've got Fargo, North Dakota. The Fargo chair probably isn't going to have as many people that are competing for that chair. It doesn't mean people aren't going to retire to Fargo. It just means that it's not as desirable as other destinations. As an investor, I'm not going to count on a wave of people retiring to Fargo, but there are markets I can look at and definitively tell that they're going to increase in numbers. Some of them we already know about. If we look at an AARP life stage study, 59% of baby boomers plan to relocate, and it should be no surprise that Florida and Arizona are so high on the list. No big surprise there. And we can invest accordingly. What we're interested in is the other 28 million that are going to relocate somewhere other than Florida and Arizona. Where are they going to go? Well, if we look at it internationally, we have to have a baseline, a starting point. So here's what our starting point is. At the end of 2013, there are 350,000 Americans who received their Social Security outside of the United States. That's our baseline, our starting point. And just to show how big a wave this is going to be in the next 10 years, not the whole 18, but just the next decade, the number of Americans who've already made the decision to retire abroad and are taking active plans to do so, including investing in buying their property, is 10 times that number. 3.3 million Americans have already decided they'll be retiring abroad in the next 10 years. And that's according to multiple surveys by Zogby International, the Center for Medical Tourism Research in Austin, Texas, and others. So that number is going to be 10 times higher, but that doesn't include the other 17 million who are interested or very interested in doing so. Just like we saw the wave of elementary schools built in the 1950s, we're seeing a massive, massive migration of people that's going to cause property values to significantly change in the most desirable retirement destinations. So the question is, where are they going to go? The number one most anticipated region for growth is Central America and the Caribbean. I have 58 offices spread throughout 30 countries in this region, and I can tell you where I think they're going to go more than any other. Because how are they going to come up with their list? How are they going to decide where to go? They're going to sit down and make a list of their wants, needs, desires, and requirements. Their list will be different than mine, but I bet a lot of the things on it look the same. I know that 91% of Americans still only speak English, so I know that those English-speaking destinations in Central America and the Caribbean will have an unfair advantage. And so I can see the handwriting on the wall. As International Living Magazine put it, Belize is the top English-speaking retirement haven in the Caribbean. That pretty much sums it up in a nutshell. So all the reasons that I decided to go myself 9 years ago, I didn't have a crystal ball. I wasn't going specifically for real estate investment or to get ahead of the baby boomer curve. I was going for quality of life. But guess what? That's what baby boomers are looking for. That's what retirees are looking for, is quality of life. So the very thing that brought me there is why I now see this as the best real estate opportunity that exists. There's two things about the baby boomers and the tourism industry, those two foundation pillars, and how they work together is pretty astounding. According to the World Tourism Organization, the baby boomers are expected to double the size of the tourism industry in the next decade. Again, this is talking about how big an impact they have. I mean, doubling the tourism industry in a decade, it's already a huge industry. And it's not going to double fairly, it's going to double unfairly. Those areas that have more of an influx of baby boomers are going to be the ones that benefit the most. And so this is like an added benefit to us. But there's another correlation between the baby boomers and tourism, and it's this. This is the one that really excites me. We've got these two competing markets looking for the same client. So, for example, we've got a little greenhouse. Let's say our little greenhouse is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And Mr. and Mrs. Smith spend 2 weeks a year on vacation in their home in Belize, but 50 weeks of the year they rent out this little house, little greenhouse, and they get rental income. And who stays in that little greenhouse, renting it by the night or by the week? It's all of these people who are coming on vacation. And we know that these people are growing in number each year in double digits. But Mr. and Mrs. Smith, after a period of time, decide to sell their little greenhouse, and they sell it to the Joneses. But the Joneses happen to be baby boomers who are looking to retire. So instead of staying in it for 2 weeks a year and renting it out, Mr. and Mrs. Jones decide they're going to move into that little greenhouse. They're going to relocate and retire there. It goes from being available 50 weeks a year as a rental to not being available as a rental at all. So what we have happening is a cannibalization in the marketplace. We have baby boomers buying rental inventory and taking it out of the rental market so they can live in it. Meanwhile, we have a tremendous demand for new rental inventory. Here's what it looks like. The supply is going down with every baby boomer who relocates or purchases in advance of relocating. Meanwhile, our demand has grown by 38% in the last 3 years. You see how that could be an issue or an opportunity? So think back to the numbers we shared just a little while ago. At the end of 2012, 16.3% increase, we needed 326 more doors. So our demand was 326, we said our supply was 30. Well, guess what? It wasn't really 30. 30 is how many were built. But do you think there were more than 30 baby boomers that bought that year? Yeah, the answer is yes. In my office alone, me personally, I had more than 30 clients that bought a condo or a house for the purpose of relocating and retiring. They might rent it for the next 2 or 3 years before they move, but they bought it with the idea of moving into it. So what that meant is we didn't have an increase of 30 units in 2012. We actually decreased. We actually lost inventory that year when we needed to add 326 more doors. This is what is the most compelling slide, even though it's poor graphics, because I'm not a graphics designer, but that was my best effort, so don't beat me up for it. But that right there is really what tells everything in a nutshell. But there's one more variable, what I call the contrarian pillar. The contrarian pillar is what happened during the recession. There was a massive exodus of capital in 2008, 2009, even early 2010. There was $3 trillion sitting on the sidelines outside of the stock market, not knowing where to go. People were paralyzed with fear. And because there was massive exodus of capital from the U.S. looking for safety, looking for tax havens and banking havens, we were one of the beneficiaries of this massive exodus of capital. My office is directly across from the airstrip. It's the first thing you see when you get off the plane, you see the RE/MAX office. And we had the same clientele that was there in 2005, 6, and 7 was still there in 8, 9, and 10. We still had people buying second homes, vacation homes, third homes, investment property, raw land. But all of a sudden we had a new market that came about, a market that came directly as a result of the recession. These were people that came to the door that hadn't been looking at international property previously, and they said, look, I just lost 30 or 40% of my portfolio. I just got whacked hard, and I was looking forward to retiring. I don't know that I can. I might have to work 5 or 10 years longer, depending on how things turn around. I wasn't prepared for this. And I want to take control of my financial future. I'm not so concerned now about the return on my investment and how high it is. I'm just concerned about the return of my investment. We had people coming to the market saying, this is especially right in the heart of the recession when nobody knew how long this was going to last or how bad it was going to get. People would come to the market and say, is there somewhere that I could put $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 into a property, and all I care about is that in 3 years' time it'll still be worth the same amount. I don't care if it's gone up, I don't care if I've gotten any cash flow at all. I just want to know that I can put it somewhere and it won't disappear. Banks are going under. FDIC insurance is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States, but in a depression or a recession, the full faith and credit of the United States is in question. And FDIC insurance is increased from $50,000 to $100,000, from $100,000 to $250,000. And why is that? Because there isn't enough money in the banks. The emperor has no clothes. So the point being that during a global economic crisis, we saw more real estate sales and appreciation in 2009 than any year prior to that. We always have the assumption that if we're going through an experience, the rest of the world is too. We're all in it together. What we don't realize is that a recession in the United States is actually a boom somewhere else. Because when money is pulled out of the market here, it's going somewhere else. And that somewhere else was Belize. So we saw a 2% drop in tourism. We saw a massive exodus of capital into real estate, looking for tax havens and banking havens and a sure place to invest. So my point of the contrarian pillar is that while the market is good, tourism and the baby boomers will continue to increase. But if we do go through another recession, and we will, because market cycles have happened always and they'll continue to happen, I don't have rose-colored glasses. I know we'll have another downturn, and when we do, I want to know in advance what's going to happen. So I know that if tourism slows a little bit, my rental return might drop a little bit. That's okay though, because my equity is going to increase, just like it did during the recession. We have that recent history as proof. So that is a very, very comprehensive look at the market. I can assure you that right now you know more than 95% of the realtors who actually sell real estate in this market on a full-time basis, in terms of having a very thorough and comprehensive understanding of the market. Now I'm going to show you specifically what Dave and his team and my team are doing about it, and specifically what the investment opportunity is. But I felt it was critical for you to have a comprehensive understanding of the market, because that really determines why our confidence level is so high. But one last photo I'm going to show you. This photo was taken in July. This is my son. I put this photo in here because it reminds me the whole reason I'm in Belize is because he walked by my office door that day and had an epiphany and realized the embarrassment as a father and a husband and a family head. But I was looking at the wrong thing in terms of what was important. And by focusing on quality of life, I get to spend more time with my family. My youngest daughter, Lauren, was born before we even decided to move to Belize. Is right here, and this was a typical day in Belize. We caught a 70-pound grouper spearfishing to go along with the 50 lobster that we had just caught. We were with another family. We had 10 of us together, our family and another family. And of course, everyone gets sick of eating just lobster, so you got to catch some fish to go along with the lobster, and then we just did a beach barbecue. So if you come down, I know Dave's done this a number of times, gotten a group together and go lobster spearfishing and diving, and I highly recommend it and invite you all to come do that. So, with that in mind, what we've done is we have a 67-acre property that is 1 mile from the bullseye, 1 mile from the airstrip, so the closest proximity we could be in terms of all these passengers coming into the marketplace. It's an entirely waterfront property. It fronts to Mahogany Bay, and all of these cul-de-sacs or fingers are streets, and these are canals that open up to the Caribbean Sea. So it's 3 minutes from any lot, from anywhere in the property, it's 3 minutes to the open water of the Caribbean Sea. So we have road access to town. We've got a marina that's being built right here. And there's 421 lots or legally subdivided parcels. Like I said before, it's all fee simple title, just like we have here in the United States. In this case, all 421 parcels have been transferred into 421 separate companies. So an individual purchaser owns a company entity. There's some tax advantages and benefits as to why that's been structured as such, all of which can be explained. This shows a development plan for the resort. So the resort is the first component. The resort is where the real estate investor opportunity is, because the resort is the inventory that's going to be rented out on a nightly and weekly basis, and that's what the greatest demand is for in the marketplace. That's what we need the most. But then we're also going to accommodate those baby boomers who are looking for their homes, their places to retire. So the initial phase of the project is a 195-room, 4-star resort hotel, which is under construction. You'll see some photos in just a moment to see how far along we are. And then on these other streets, we'll have single-family homes and townhouses and other residential inventory. There'll also be about 6 to 8 restaurants, a beach club, the marina, retail, commercial, farmers market. It's a full village. It's a Caribbean resort village. And our architectural team has done this successfully in the Cayman Islands, in the Bahamas, in Jamaica, and in Florida. So it's a proven concept. Our architects have won Cottage of the Year in Coastal Living magazine. It's truly a world-class team that we've assembled. The professional hotel management is called Scout Hotels. They're out of the United States. Their properties range from Maine all the way down to Florida. Their specialty is boutique destinations, Cape Cod, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, some very notable properties that they manage and are responsible for running and operating. This is a close-up of the resort. You can see the individual parcels of land and the different configurations. So for example, this right here, you'll see these photos in a moment. I know you can't see this very well, but this is a lot, a parcel of land that has a family cottage, a 3-bedroom cottage, and then 2 little guest cottages. And so that's one lot configuration. And a family cottage with 2 little guest cottages gives incredible flexibility from a rental standpoint. The 3-bedroom cottage can be rented to a family. The individual little guest cottages can be rented as hotel rooms, but they can also become satellite bedrooms of the house. So you can rent it as a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3, a 4, or even a 5-bedroom, all off of that one lot configuration. So a lot of thought has gone into the design and configuration. We'll have some bridges that connect from one street to another, so you don't have to go all the way down to the end. This is where the Bay Club is going. The Bay Club will be open. The resort will be opening September of next year, and it'll open with 195 rooms, fully furnished, turnkey. And I'll show you a photo. This photo was taken October 3rd, about a month and a half ago. There's 150 doors, 150 units of the 195 that have been built. The Bay Club is going to go under construction here right after the holidays. We just have finished the final design plan. We hired a company called PKF Consultants. PKF is the largest hotel consulting firm in the United States, and their forte is the Caribbean region. And we hired them to say, what is our absorption? If we open with 195 rooms, that'll be a 10% increase to the room inventory on the island. How long do you see our absorption period? Because we know that we want to build more resort inventory, but we also want to make sure that we don't have any lull or lag because of how much we bring to the market all at once. So we said we want to make sure that from our investors' standpoint, we're able to comfortably tell them what's going to happen with us bringing 195 rooms to market, and how long is that going to take for that to be absorbed into the marketplace. So they came down and did a very, very comprehensive market study and analysis and visited all the resorts and hotels, met with the Police Tourism Board, met with the airlines, and their answer was that we needed to go back to the drawing board and stop construction of the Bay Club, because we were just about to start construction for the Bay Club to accommodate 195 rooms. They said you need to revise it to accommodate 350 rooms, because as soon as you finish the first 195 rooms, you're going to look at needing to add additional inventory. So that's what we thought, that's what we felt, but it was good to have independent third-party validation to verify that. Scout Hotels, our operator, was actually who mandated and required that we hire a third-party study to be done, because they wanted to make sure, for their own benefit, before they commit to coming in and managing and operating the resort. So as a result, we're now finalizing our plans for our initial resort amenities to be built sufficient for the first 350 rooms. But what will come to market is the first 195. This is another aerial view. To date, there is a total of $36 million that's been raised for the project, and there's no debt. There's no debt on the underlying land. There's $60 million of land in the subdivision, and in addition to that, there's been $36 million that's been put into the ground. There are no liens, no mortgage, no encumbrances, no debt on the project at all. I've been involved in real estate investment, real estate development for over 22 years, and I've never been involved in any other project that has been able to be so successful at raising capital and to literally have no debt on the property. When people ask me, well, what can happen if there's a downturn? What could cause the project to fail? The answer invariably is that any real estate failure is tied to failure to service the debt. In this case, with no debt, we may have lower projections or lower return than our projections, but that's about our worst case scenario. And based on what I've shared with you, I'm going to show you very conservative projections, but the reality is the market is a lot stronger than what I'm going to show you as conservative projections. These are our first retail buildings. On the left here, this is the Rum and Bean. The Rum and Bean is a gourmet coffee shop. This is an operating business. It's open for business now. We actually had, we opened it thinking that it would run at a loss, that it would run in the red until we opened the resort next September. And within the first month of operations, it's operating in the black, making 5 figures net profit because there's just so much demand for quality businesses. Very few quality coffee shops on island. And so the Rum and Bean is a coffee shop by day and a gourmet rum bar in the evening. The other side of these two buildings looks like this. Those are those same two buildings, and this is a streetscape from the architects before construction began. But this is a rendering of some of the single-family houses that are going to be built in the next phase for some of the residential inventory. This is the family cottage. These are the garden cottages. And so we're going to take a look. These are the renderings, but we're going to take a look at actual photos and see this is what the finished inventory looks like. So I like to refer to it as James Bond meets Ralph Lauren. It's a British colonial style architecture, finished to a very high degree. It's a rustic elegance. You notice that all of the wood is exposed. We're really highlighting the Belizean hardwoods. Mahogany is one of 15 different hardwoods indigenous to Belize. And so we have a very, very high-end product. It's a 4-star product. And really that's the sweet spot in the market. If you look at what the ADR, the average daily rate for last year, for the entire year for the island was, it was $215 per night. It's a very high average daily rate. But that was the average. That was everything from 1 star to 5 stars. So the average property being a 2 to 2.5 star, $215 a night is going to get you a 2 to 2.5 star property. A 4-star property is typically going to be $300 to $375 a night as far as the nightly rate, just by comparison. So the keeping suites are the product type that you see featured here. They're effectively studio condos. It's a 4-plex, 4 units on 1 lot. The syndication opportunity that we're going to be talking about is 1 lot of keeping suites, which is a total of 4 doors, and then 2 lots that consist of a family cottage with 2 guest cottages or 2 garden cottages. And so these are the different product types, configurations. The total equity raise is $2.3 million, which is for a total of 3 lots, 3 parcels of land, and those 3 parcels consist of a total of 10 doors, or 10 units. So it's 10 units of hotel inventory. Typically, you can't buy a hotel without buying the entire hotel. It's very hard to invest in a hotel without purchasing it outright. In this particular case, the syndication is able to have ownership and control of 10 of the rooms, 10 of the income-producing units within 195 rooms of 4-star resort inventory. And we've structured it to make that possible. And in this particular case, the syndication actually owns the land under the property. So it's fee simple title, whole ownership of that portion of the project. The minimum investment level, this is open to accredited investors. So the minimum investment level is $100,000 per share. The projected annual income on the total equity raised is $344,837. And I'll show you what we're using as numbers for that basis. The projected annual investor profit is $275,869 after split with the syndication, yielding a 12%, 11.99, but we'll just call that 12% projected annual investor ROI. And that 12% is the cash-on-cash return, unleveraged. There's no construction financing available in this market, and that's why there aren't more hotels being built. With the numbers that I've shared with you, you would assume that people would be coming in and building hotels with a tremendous demand. There's no construction financing available. When I shared with you that we went from 670 rooms to 1,300 rooms from 2006 to 2012, that's an increase of 1,330 doors. Of those 1,330, how many do you think were hotel rooms? Most of them should have been, if not all of them should have been. But of the 1,330, it's going to shock you to learn that only 30 of them were hotel rooms. We've added 30 hotel rooms in the last 7 years. Total. We added 1,300 condos and villas. So we have people renting condos when really all they're looking for is a hotel room. But here's the problem. If I buy a piece of property, let's say it takes all my capital to buy the land, I now don't have the money to build. So I go to the bank says, yeah, we're not going to do construction financing. Once you're built, when you're done, we'll let you do takeout financing. But the banks in Belize are 60% loan to value, 10.5% interest, and they'll only let you refi after the fact, after you've already paid for the property. So that being the case, I say to myself, I wanted to build a hotel, but I don't have the money to build a hotel. So what am I going to do instead? Well, I'll build condos. And why is that? Because with condos, I can build with other people's money. If I take a deposit, 10% deposit, and 10% deposit, and 10% deposit, 10% deposit, I've got 4 deposits. I can build a 4-plex, and I'm going to do staged payments. And as I collect payments, I'll build. So I can build with their money. And that's how those 1,300 condos got built, because there's no construction financing in the marketplace. And so as a result, what we need is hotel rooms, and what's being built is condos. Because condos you can sell to baby boomers. Nobody's paying for the hotels that all the tourists want. So we decided to answer the needs of the market. And so we're building a 195-room resort And then we'll have all the inventory for the baby boomers after that, but the here and now is the resort inventory. That 12% is the most conservative projection that I can give you, and I'm going to show you the numbers as to how that 12% was derived. But I want to share with you this, that there is a financing option that we're looking at after stabilization. After we've been open 6 to 12 months, we've got 6 to 12 months of operating history, we've met with several U.S. lenders who have said that if they can substantiate using the income approach the return on investment, that they'd be very, very interested in coming in at 7 or 8% financing, 70, 75% LTV, what might typically be considered subprime rates. They're not having to take subprime borrowers, nor is it a subprime property, but if they can get 7 or 8% on their money, they're very, very interested. And to have that type of security or collateral makes it all the better. What then happens, if you have a 12% return and you put financing at 7 or 8% with a 75% loan to value, you can return about 93% of your investor equity right out of the gate. That's without any appreciation. That's just based on your raise amount, not even factoring in a cap rate. But you can return almost all of your investor equity, and your return is going to go up above 40%. As soon as you return all the investor equity, your return is now infinite. Because if you return all of your capital back and no longer having capital, then it's an infinite return. That's what's very feasible here within about a 2-year window. That's our time frame to get full return of investor equity is about 2 years, is my estimate or projection. There's 2 different investment options. The option is available for an investor to purchase their own lot, to not participate in the syndication. It's very important to understand that that option does exist. And Dave would be very supportive of that if that better fits your personal investment objectives. The price to purchase a lot is approximately $715,000 to $750,000, and there is no financing. It's a straight cash purchase. We've had a number of individuals do that. But the syndication allows you to leverage position. The syndication allows you to leverage into a position you otherwise couldn't afford to invest in. Typically, hotels are something that, as individual investors, we don't have the opportunity to invest in, and yet hotels are the highest producing asset class, even in the United States, among all the different real estate asset classes. So it's $100,000 minimum. With a $150,000 investment, then you get the benefit of 1 week use of a garden cottage, 1 week personal use of a garden cottage every year. So there's an additional use component. Of course, that's going to have to be subject to seasonal availability, so it doesn't affect the rental return for the syndication. But that's a perk or benefit of coming in at the $150,000 level. At the $200,000 level, then rather than a week in the garden cottage, it's a week in the family cottage, the 3-bedroom cottage. So that additional week of usage is really about an additional 1.5 to 1.7% return if you were to look at it in terms of what it would cost you to actually rent that inventory. So there's a significant benefit or upside to coming in above the syndication minimum. That's a 12% projected cash-on-cash return unleveraged, and as I mentioned, it's open to accredited investors. The unit configurations, if somebody is looking at purchasing their own lot, then the figures of 716 and 738, those are turnkey figures. That includes the furnishing package. That's everything top to bottom, fully furnished, literally rent ready. So somebody could literally come in and rent the unit that day. But as I mentioned, the syndication is really the opportunity that we're focusing on here because it allows you to leverage into that position at the rate that you're comfortable with. All of this is available to you in the executive summary. We'll talk about how you'll get that here in just a moment. But I put together projections. I have a realistic column, I have an optimistic, pessimistic, and catastrophic. And I did that just simply to give you a range so you can see for yourself. The realistic projection, the 12% that we're going off of, is based on the garden cottages having an ADR, or average daily rate, of $209.93. We'll call it $210. Right off the bat, based on what I've shared with you up until now, you know that that's artificially low. If the ADR on the island last year was $215, that's what people actually paid. That's after discounts, after promotions, after buy 4 nights, get the 5th night free. $215 is what people actually paid for an average 2.5 star stay. This is a 4-star property, so why have I got a projection of $210? Because we want to under-promise and over-deliver. And we want to make sure that we're very conservative on the projections. But I just want to make sure you understand that when I say realistic, it is an open disclosure, it's an artificially conservative estimate. Same thing with the occupancy. The occupancy here shows 71.78% is a blended occupancy. When you take peak season at 100%, there's 30 days that we know are sold out. Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, Easter, Lobster Fest. These Lobster Fest isn't, we don't have that here in the States, but that's like Christmas to us at least. But we have high season at 80%, and we have our value season at 60%. So the blended average is 71.78. We'll call that 72%. There's nothing on the island that's operating at 72%. There's nothing that's operated that low in over 2 years. And there's no reason to expect it's going to drop to that. But again, let's be conservative with it, and that's going to yield a 12% return. In our catastrophic scenario, if we had a 52% occupancy, now again, I can't even think of what could cause that to happen, because during the recession we dropped 2%. Even after 9/11, we didn't see anything, below a 75% occupancy, and that was when the market was much less mature than it is today. So at a 52% occupancy, let's just say that we had a 6 or 12 month period where we went through real financial hardship globally. First of all, we're going to have more to be concerned with than how our investment in lease is performing, if we're talking that dire of circumstances. But in any case, we still are looking at a 7% return at a 52% occupancy. That's the stability of our return here. So the next steps, I'm going to ask Dave at this point to hand out the letter of commitment, and I'll explain exactly what that entails. The syndication, the funds are due on the syndication by Monday, December 1st. Obviously, you need to be able to review the executive summary, review all the documentation, and then the closing of the syndication is scheduled for Monday, December 7th. The letter of commitment is what allows you to express your interest so that in return you can receive the executive summary and the documents necessary for review to see whether or not this is right for you. So please understand that the letter of commitment is non-binding. It's non-binding in both directions. It's not a guarantee that there's a place for you within the syndication, because we have had the syndications oversubscribed on a fairly regular basis, in which case we may ask to have you hold off until the next syndication. But this particular one is significant because this is part of the 195 rooms that open in September. So rather than being in the next phase, this is what's going to be part of the initial resort inventory that opens. So the letter of commitment is a means by which you can express your intended interest, subject to and contingent upon you're actually reviewing the executive summary and all the numbers and going through the deal in greater detail. Because at this point, you probably have enough information to make a decision as to whether you're interested to find out more about whether it's right for you or not. That's where I would say that you're able to make a qualified, educated decision as to whether to proceed with learning more. That's probably the best way to summarize it. So, if you'll fill out the letter of commitment, the amount can change when Dave follows up with you personally to answer your questions after you have the executive summary in hand. Undoubtedly, you'll have questions. You'll want to either schedule an appointment, a face-to-face, a phone call, or whatever's most convenient for you. As you get those questions answered, you may decide to increase the amount of the commitment. You may decide to change it otherwise. But the whole point being that this allows and enables the team to have an idea of who to follow up with first, and to see exactly where the interest is so that we can ascertain on a first-come, first-served basis who the participants will be in the syndication. So, Dave, I think you've got copies of the executive summary here with you. So if you'll see Dave and turn that in to Dave, then he'll, on the basis of turning that in, he'll get a copy of the executive summary to you. If you'd also like to have that sent to you as a soft copy, as a PDF, then he can certainly do that as well. But he has brought hard copies here. With that, obviously, it begs the question of Q&A.